My name is Hugh Burrows. I first came here in 1936. We lived in Methven, and an uncle brought us over, and we had a look at the lake and came over and had a look at the power station. And then shortly after that, I had friends in Methven who came up to the lake to go fishing, and we caught lots of salmon. I didn't catch any to start with. I did the cleaning, but about 1943 I started fishing, and I caught 3 salmon the first time I went out. In 1945, my father, who was a carpenter, and my mother shifted from Methven over to the power station. Dad became the carpenter here, and I came up for holidays, and eventually I started work here in 1949 when Mr. Hart was the power station superintendent. It was an interesting time because Mr. Hart was a great planter of trees. He established his experimental plot, which today is called the Arboretum. I helped him plant some trees. I worked at the intake doing concrete work, and interestingly, my father was the carpenter who put the boxing in for that concrete. I also worked at the Akron diversion. We renewed the gate there. My father installed that gate, and while he was doing that, we cleaned the dam out. I worked at the Harper River, where there are stone groins have been built to keep the river diverted in towards the gates so that the water can run into the lake. I worked there for 11 weeks, one part of it, and about 3 weeks another time on that work. Well, the first survey was done in 1911, and the building of the first tunnel began soon after that. It had to be decided, first of all, where the power station was going to be. And the surveyors who decided on the site where it is made an excellent choice, because initially it was thought that the tunnel could come across from further up towards Peak Hill, which is about 4 or 5 miles further up river, but it was decided that where the tail race runs out now was an ideal place for the tail race to run out, because there's a big block of stone called the Point, which it runs past immediately into the Rakaia River. So that was how it was decided to build the power station where it is now. The first tunnel was quite a lot smaller than in diameter than the second tunnel. Each of the tunnels is a layer of concrete all the way around. The first tunnel, initially, it had been intended to take the water in from out in the lake about 40 metres offshore, but they struck a problem because of shattered rock which had been shattered by earthquake movement 1,000 years ago, and there was quite a lot of leakage into the tunnel, so they decided to put the entrance to each of the tunnels in close right alongside the shore. And on the second tunnel, they did what they had intended to do with the first one, and the tunnel was dug. There was a cap floated out on the lake over to the top of where they were going to start digging from, and it was sunk onto the lake floor, and gradually, as they worked away at it, it went down into the lake bed. And this was an ideal situation. One of the big problems that came about with having the first intake close to the shore was there's a lot of shingle drift comes down with northwest winds, and if they'd had that intake out further, that shingle would have drifted past. But they had to build 2 groins out into the lake. Initially they were made the same way as that we built the groins up at the Harper River. They were covered, there were big stones set in place and then covered with Hessian wiring and clamped together, but there were problems attached to that because that wiring began to rot away, and the big stones emptied out from inside the groin. But anyway, prior to that, they had put a concrete covers over each of the groins, about 6 inches thick. The first groin, they knocked holes in the top of the groin and poured concrete into that. That was before I started work here. But on the other groin, called Bevan's groin, which points straight up into the lake, I was involved with the same sort of a thing. The groin had emptied out of big rocks because the Hessian wire had rotted away, and we one winter we made concrete just with a small concrete mixer and carted in with or pushed in a wheelbarrow to fill those holes up. We knocked holes in the top of the groin, and we used 24 tonnes of cement mixed up with shingle before we got the job finished. We also put a row of water tanks, 400-gallon water tanks, right around the perimeter of the end of the groin and along each side, and filled them up with big stones and concrete. So that was the sort of work that was done at the intake. One of the early jobs was they decided to raise the lake level, the maximum rake level, and that was the job I worked on with my father because they found that when the lake was right at its maximum height, the water was washing in around where the gates are on the intake. So by raising it about 18 inches, that did away with that problem. Each winter we went up into the outside gang people went up into the trees, and we felled dead trees which were cut up for firewood, which was used by the people in the village. We cut it into lengths. We had an organisation called the Cow Club here, and they owned the saw bench, and each household was able to get 2 dray loads of firewood each year, which of course meant that they had to learn how to saddle up a draft horse and put it into a dray. The horses had been used widely early on, but when I was started here, they were on their last legs, and finally the last 3 were taken away and used for dog tucker on one of the sheep stations in the district. I worked on pipeline painting, and I did that sort of work for outside gang work for 6 years. Then it was decided to renovate a lot of the older houses, and I was given a job with the station carpenter, who was a chap called Bill Foley by that time. My parents had shifted to Lake Waitaki about 1952, and Bill Foley was the carpenter when I started doing that work. And it was quite interesting and worthwhile because I learnt all sorts of things it was like doing an apprenticeship, a carpenter's apprenticeship. I did relining of houses. Some buildings I helped renew the roofs on. I built picket fences and paling fences, and we put runways into the garages. I did that for 5 years, and that work was coming to an end, and the storekeeper's job came vacant, so I applied for that, and I became the storekeeper, and I did that for the next 25 years. I retired in 1985. The storekeeping was quite very interesting because I was the district stores officer in Christchurch was the man I was responsible to. I wasn't responsible to the any of the power station people for any of that work, but of course I had to have the stores here so that people could come in and get their nuts and bolts and lengths of steel and welding rod and electric light fittings and that sort of thing, nails, and bolts, and also we had a lot of machine spares because there were 4 different sorts of machines in the power station. We had to have 4 different sorts of machine spares. I had a big job to start with when I was doing that work. The machine spares were kept in what we call the bulk store, which is just across the road from the post office, and eventually I had all that those machine spares catalogued, numbered, so that anybody could go in if they had a catalogue and they could find where materials were. And I also did the timekeeping. I started that about 3 years after I started in the store, and I'm quite proud of the fact that during my 24 years of doing the timekeeping, I made out the pay sheets up to the gross amount due. I only made 2 mistakes during all that time. I could well get a job sorting out the teachers' pay, the problem that they've had recently. I was single, and after I lived with my parents for a couple of years. Then I shifted up to what was called the huts, where the single men who were labourers lived, and eventually I moved down to what was known as the single men's quarters. It's now called the Lake Coleridge Lodge, and I lived there for the rest of the time that I worked at Lake Coleridge. The single men and other workers, especially people who came from Christchurch to spend time here working, had their meals at the dining room, which was close to the billiard room up the hill. There were also 5 bedrooms there. One of the best things that I ever did was to the foreman, Jack Cameron, asked me one day if I would be interested in working in the dining room with Mrs. McLean, the manageress. And I said, oh yes, I'm quite happy to do that. So I went and worked with Mrs. McLean for about 3 months. I was doing the cooking on her time off. We did shift work there, and she was off for 4 days at a time at times. And I had an assistant came in and helped me, a woman came in, and I learnt all of the running of the staff mess and the buying of foodstuffs, and shortly afterward I became the mess secretary, and that knowing how the hostel ran was a real boon, because I worked with a number of different women, probably about 20 different women as manageresses, and they carried on with Mrs. McLean's way of running the hostel. We rewrote the staff mess rules. I had to abide by them, and interestingly enough, one of the head accountant men from Christchurch office came up one day and asked me if he could borrow our set of rules. The department was going to rewrite the staff mess rules for all the staff messes throughout New Zealand. There were probably about 30 of them, and lo and behold, when the new rules came out, they were virtually exactly the same as what the one was that I had handed over to him. So I was very pleased about that. I used to go shooting, duck shooting, rabbit shooting, hare shooting. I had a Labrador dog which had to be fed, so I always had to get some possums or hares to feed him on. And also went fishing in the lake. And in 1963, my brother suggested that we should build a batch on the lake shore, and I agreed to that. We gained permission from the Murchison family, who owned the land, to erect our batch, and we spent about 4 or 5 years working on doing that so that my brother's kids could come up and experience the same things that we had as children in the high country. Two of the biggest changes that occurred early on were the tar sealing of the road. Gradually, when I first started here, the tar sealing reached as far as Darfield. It gradually crept nearer and nearer, and it was discussed at a Public Service Association meeting one night, suggesting that we should make an approach to the department to get the tar sealed road to come right into the village and round the village. They made a promise that once it got to the Akron corner, 4 miles down the road, that then they would arrange for the rest of the road to be done the rest of the way up into the village and around the village, and that happened. Another big thing that happened, which caused us to have to change lots of things, was the advent of TV. People started getting TV, and so we had to change our table tennis night because that didn't fit in with Coronation Street and other things like that. Then after I left, there were enormous changes because of computerisation, and when I was working here, we had about 36 people on the living in the village, working in the village. Altogether, the population was just over 100, about 108, and the majority of them worked on the power scheme. All the houses in the village, with the exception of the schoolhouse, belonged to the electricity department. So it meant that all the maintenance had to be done by people who worked here. They were like an electrician who was employed to look after the electrical side of the down in the power station. He also did any renewal of wiring in the houses. Carpenters also, well, there was little carpentry work, but there was always a little bit in the power station, but was a carpenter employed, and it was virtually the whole time he was going around the village doing the repair work on houses. The station fitter did all the plumbing work around the station, around the village. So, and not only there, but up at the Harper River, we looked after the Harper River people. So that was why, and also then the grounds were maintained by the outside gang. All the mowing was done by them, and all the other sort of jobs, like concrete work over at the intake, was done by the outside gang. The village life was really marvellous. Right from early on, The hydroelectric branch of the PWD, it was called early on. The heads in that department encouraged the superintendents who worked at Lake Coleridge to foster organisations in the village, to get the people who lived in the village to take part in all sorts of organisations. Of course, there was a school here, so there was a school committee right from 1914 when the school was formed. The next club that was formed was the billiard club. Then the cow club was formed in 1920. But how it came about was that the foreman, who was foreman here when I started work in 1949, was a chap called Jack Cameron. He was with the first survey gang who started in 1911 on the job, and he worked here for 41 years and ended up, well, he was foreman for many years. But in 1914, he and his wife had a little daughter, and she was quite sickly. They took her to a doctor, and the doctor said, "What sort of milk are you feeding this baby?" He knew that the mother wasn't feeding it, the baby, the little girl. And they said, "Oh, we've given it condensed milk, that's all we've got. We haven't got cow's milk." He said, "She must have cow's milk." So Jack Cameron went off down to Colgate sale yards one day, and he bought a cow which was due to calve just in a couple of 3 weeks, and he began to drive it back up to Lake Coleridge from Colgate, 28 miles. He reached Windwhistle about halfway there on the first night. He was notified at a farmhouse there that his father had passed away. He left the cow grazing in the paddock and went down to look after his father's funeral. He arrived back in about 4 days, got the cow out and drove her the rest of the way up to Lake Coleridge, and shortly she calved, and she was producing far more milk than the Camerons could use. So other people with small children around the village were profiting and getting fresh milk for their children. Then as time went on, the number of cows mounted up, and in the finish, by 1920, Jack was milking 6 cows, which would supply almost the whole of the village. And then it was decided to form the cow club. Jack Cameron kept on milking the cows up until about 1944, I think, but he gave it away a short time before he retired. The cow club employed people who to do the milking at the reduced rate. The linesmen, we had 3 linesmen here for quite a number of years, and they seemed to be able to work their hours so that they arrived home about 4:30 in the afternoon. They'd get the village children would get the cows in to at the bale, and away they'd go and milk the cows, and that went on for quite a few years. But anyway, the cow club had its ups and downs over the years. One part of it, the dairy board used to carry out an inspection. I'm not certain, I think it was at 6 monthly intervals, and they had laid the law down that the cow club had to build a good dairy milking and have a good milking plant, and so that had been decided on, and they were building that setting up that new cow bale when the Secretary Treasurer absconded with, well, I think he just spent the money because he was receiving the money that was being paid for the milk, and he was using it, and he cleared out. and eventually was caught up in Auckland and did some time for what he'd done, but the judge wouldn't order him to repay the money. So things had to change then on the way that the cow club was run. And I was, because I was doing the mess secretary's job, they asked me if I would reorganise the bookkeeping of the cow club, so I set it up the same way as I ran the staff mess books, and they didn't have any great amount of trouble from then on with the finances.